Hi, are you in bed already? Great, I'm glad to hear from you. My name is Moon. Well, let's put it this way. I'm the one who wanders through the quiet halls of a long dormant story. I find hidden doors, open them slightly, and whisper what I saw to those who, like you, are already preparing for a journey into the world of dreams. And today we have a special story. We will go to Alexandria, but not the one from the textbooks. Noisy, dusty, full of sunshine. No. We will enter Alexandria at night, a secret place where only the shadows and thoughts of a single woman glide through the marble corridors of the palace, the one whose name we seem to know by heart, but actually don't know at all. We're going to talk about Cleopatra, but forget everything they told you at school or showed you in the movies. There will be no cliches today. There will be no cheap drama. There will only be amazing and sometimes shocking truths. The truth is that she was a brilliant pharmaceutical scientist, a virtuoso of black PR, the world's first IT girl. If you imagine that her information technology is languages, codes, and a network of spies. And yes, we will carefully unwrap that very carpet and see what was really inside. This channel is our common quiet place. YouTube doesn't monetize us, and there's a magic to it. We're only here because you and I are genuinely interested. Every new story, every forgotten fact is our little find. Therefore, if you feel comfortable here and you want these night trips to continue, make one simple and very important gesture. Subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to say, hey, caretaker of forgotten stories, I'm with you. Go on. I'll also be incredibly happy if you leave a comment. Not just a smiley face, but a little more. Write down your name, or whatever you want me to call you. And most importantly, what is your bedtime ritual? Are you reading? Are you listening to the rain outside? Or maybe you're staring at the ceiling, scrolling through the events of the day? Let's create the coziest and sleepiest community in the world here. Now turn down the lights and cover yourself warmly. And get ready to be surprised. Because our first stop is not the throne room, library. And it's not a goddess sitting in it, but a girl who just wants to get to the bottom of the truth. Go. We're not going to the throne room, not to a lavish party. We're slipping into a quieter space, lit by the flickering, oily flame of a simple lamp. This is where our story really begins. Not with a queen, but with a student. Because the first shocking fact, the one that unravels the entire tapestry, is this. Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian. I know, it feels wrong. It's like finding out Sherlock Holmes was actually French. But it's true. The woman who became the living embodiment of Egypt was, by blood, as Greek as a statue of Athena. She was Cleopatra VII Philopator, the last of a long line started by Ptolemy the Soter, a Macedonian Greek general, a childhood friend and bodyguard of Alexander the Great himself. When Alexander's empire was carved up after his death, Ptolemy got Egypt. He and his descendants ruled it for nearly 300 years, but they never really became Egyptian. They were colonizers in palace clothes. They kept their Greek language, their Greek customs, their Greek gods, just merging them with Egyptian ones for convenience. They mostly stayed in their glorious Mediterranean-facing capital of Alexandria, a Greek island on Egyptian soil. The real Egypt, the ancient land of the pharaohs with its Nile villages and desert temples, was practically a foreign country to them. They were the permanent foreign exchange students who'd moved into the grandest house on campus and never bothered to learn the local language. Which brings us to shocker number 2, and the first glimpse of her particular genius. Cleopatra was a language nerd of epic proportions. While her royal forebears looked down their Hellenistic noses, young Cleopatra did the unthinkable. She applied herself. By the time she was a young woman, historians credit her with fluency in at least 9 languages. Not just please and thank you, but true, nuanced, diplomatic fluency. She spoke Greek, her native tongue, and of course, but also Ethiopian, the language of the troglodytes, a people from the African Red Sea coast, Hebrew, Arabic, the Syrian dialect, Aramaic, Median, Parthian, and, most crucially, Egyptian. Let that sink in. She was the first, the only Ptolemaic ruler in nearly 300 years to bother learning the language of the millions of people she claimed to rule. This wasn't just a party trick. This was a profound political calculation, an act of respect, and a masterstroke of public relations. Imagine the scene. The high priest of Ptah in Memphis, accustomed to speaking to the pharaoh through a translator. A Greek eunuch who might mangle the sacred phrases, suddenly hears this young woman, with the faintest trace of a Greek accent perhaps, addressing him directly in the ancient holy tongue. The effect would have been electric, staggering. It was a message loud and clear. I am not them, I am yours. She was hacking the cultural code, bypassing the bureaucratic middlemen, and connecting directly to the source of her kingdom's power and soul. She didn't just want to rule Egypt from a palace, she wanted to understand it, to be accepted by it, and she knew the key was in the words. Now this picture of a studious, linguistically gifted princess clashes violently with the most persistent image of her, the incomparable beauty, which is our third shocking fact. Cleopatra probably wasn't a great beauty in the conventional sense. Forget Elizabeth Taylor's violet eyes. The best evidence we have, the hard, contemporary, non-Hollywood evidence, comes from coins. Coins don't flatter. They're state propaganda, but they need to be recognizable. And on Cleopatra's coins, we see a woman with a strong, prominent nose, a sharp, jutting chin, a wide mouth, and eyes that are intelligent and penetrating, but not necessarily the stuff of poetic legend. Plutarch, the ancient biographer who wrote about her just over a century after her death, addresses this head-on. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, "Look, her actual looks weren't so astonishing that you'd say she was the most beautiful woman in the room." But then he delivers the crucial line. But her presence, once she spoke, was utterly bewitching. Her weapon wasn't perfect symmetry, it was charisma, intellect, and a voice. He describes her voice as an instrument of infinite variety, like a multi-stringed lyre. She could bend it to any language, any social situation, from a scholarly debate to a whispered intimacy. It was, by all accounts, mesmerizing. Her charm, he says, cast a spell and left a sting. Think about the most compelling person you've ever met. Not necessarily the prettiest or the handsomest, but the one whose conversation was so engaging, whose mind was so quick, whose energy was so focused on you that you simply forgot everything else. That was Cleopatra's superpower. She wasn't a painting to be admired from a distance. She was a force of nature to be experienced, a conversation that pulled you in and changed you. Her beauty was dynamic, not static. It was in her wit, her timing, her sheer, undeniable mental electricity. So we have a young woman, fiercely intelligent, preternaturally gifted with languages, possessing a charismatic aura rather than a classically perfect face. This is the person who, at 17 or 18, found herself co-ruler of Egypt. And here's where the palace politics, the messy, brutal family drama, sets the stage for the legendary carpet moment. Her father, Ptolemy the Ormus, nicknamed Auletes, the flute player, was a weak ruler, deeply in debt to Roman loan sharks, and kept on his throne only by Roman military support. When he died in 51 BC, he left the throne jointly to Cleopatra, about 18, and her younger brother Ptolemy III, about 10. Oh, and as per delightful Ptolemaic family tradition, they were to marry each other. It was a political and symbolic union, a way to keep the royal bloodline pure and the power shared. Naturally, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Cleopatra from the very start seems to have taken the lead. For the first 3 years, her name appears first on official documents, a significant detail implying she was the senior partner. She was the one making decisions, administering the kingdom. This did not sit well with her little brother king, and more importantly, it terrified the cabal of powerful men who surrounded him. The eunuch Pothinus, who was his regent and treasurer, the general Achilles, who commanded the army, and the rhetoric tutor Theodotus. These men saw their influence and their chance to rule through a pliable boy king, slipping away because of this far too capable, far too independent young woman. So they did what palace factions do. They began a whisper campaign. They isolated her. They used their control over the young king and the army to slowly push her out. They stoked Alexandrian resentment against her, possibly blaming her for famines or economic woes. The relationship broke down into civil war. By 48 BC, Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria. She was effectively in exile, raising a mercenary army in Syria to try and fight her way back to what was rightfully hers. Meanwhile, the wider world was crashing into Egypt's drama. The Roman Republic was tearing itself apart in its own civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. After a crushing defeat at the Battle of Pharsalus, Pompey fled, seeking refuge in Egypt, where he had once been a patron of the Ptolemies. Ptolemy XV's advisors, Pothinus, Achillas, and Theodotus, saw a dangerous opportunity. With Pompey defeated, they calculated that Caesar was the rising sun. To win his favor, they decided to offer him a gruesome gift, the head of his rival. As Pompey stepped ashore, he was treacherously murdered, beheaded, right in front of his wife and children who watched from his ship. His head and signet ring were preserved. Days later, Julius Caesar himself arrived in Alexandria with a small force of legionaries. He was presented with the head of Pompey. The ancient sources say he wept, not just out of pity for a former son-in-law and colleague, but in disgust at the barbaric, clumsy treachery of it. It was a move by amateurs, and it offended his Roman sense of legal and political propriety. He was now stuck in a volatile foreign capital in the middle of a dynastic spat, with the corpse of a Roman consul used as a greeting card. Caesar took up residence in the royal palace quarters. Ptolemy XV and his court hurried to him, all false smiles and flattery, presenting their side of the story. The troublesome, usurping sister was vanquished. The kingdom was stable under the boy king. All was well. Could the mighty Caesar perhaps recognize Ptolemy as sole ruler? And, oh, while you're here, about those massive debts our father owed Roman bankers. But Caesar was a lawyer and a politician before he was a general. He knew instability when he saw it. He knew an unresolved succession was a threat to Roman interests in Roman repayment schedules. Citing the will of Ptolemy XV, which he had probably read, he declared that the siblings must disband their armies and settle their dispute before him, the representative of the Roman people. He commanded that both Cleopatra and Ptolemy appear before him. Ptolemy was there, fuming but present. But Cleopatra, how could she possibly get to him? The palace was controlled by her brother's guards. The city was hostile. Every gate, every corridor, every dock was watched by men who would kill her the moment she showed her face. To walk in was to die. She was in Syria, desperate. Her throne was a few hundred yards away, separated by a maze of marble halls and murderous intent. She had no army that could breach the city in time. She had only her wits. And in that moment of extreme pressure, she conceived a plan that was so audacious, so perfectly tailored to the psychology of a man like Caesar, that it would cement her place in history not as a victim, but as a master strategist of the human heart. The stage was set. The players were in place. The annoyed Roman god in the palace, the scheming boy king and his vicious advisors, and the exiled queen, watching from the shadows, preparing her move. She wasn't coming to beg. She was coming to surprise. And to do that, she needed to become something else entirely. Not a queen, not a supplicant, but a mystery, delivered directly to his feet. But that moment, the rustle of the carpet, the unrolling, the first look between the weary Roman general and the disheveled but fiercely determined young woman, that's the climax of this chapter, and the beginning of everything else. For now, let's leave her there, on the cusp of that decision, a mind racing in the Syrian dark, plotting not just a return, but an entrance that would echo for millennia. The quiet, studious linguist, the political hacker, was about to perform her masterpiece, and the world would never be the same. Let's shift the scene. Forget for a moment the grand audience halls and the martial clamor of the Civil War. Step away from the image of the queen on the barge or the lover in the palace. Instead, follow me down a different corridor of the royal quarter in Alexandria. The air changes here. It's cooler, quieter, and carries a complex symphony of scents. Not the heavy incense of temples, but the sharp, clean, and sometimes acrid aromas of alchemy. Here the smell of crushed herbs, simmering oils, bitter almonds, and distilled flowers hangs in the stillness. This is Cleopatra's other court, her laboratory. If the first chapter shattered the myth of her nationality and passive beauty, this one dismantles an even more persistent idea, that she was merely a seductress who used her charms as her only tool. The truth is far more fascinating and formidable. Cleopatra was, in essence, a scientist queen. Her mind, so adept at languages and politics, was also rigorously methodological, curious, and deeply engaged in the applied sciences of her day. Her power wasn't just in her voice, it was in her formulas. Our first stop is the most tangible evidence of her scholarly mind. She was a published author. In an age where royal women were monuments, patrons, or pawns, Cleopatra actively contributed to the sum of human knowledge. We know this not because her scrolls survive, the great fire that would later damage the library saw to that, but because other later scholars of immense reputation cite her work with seriousness and respect. The most famous reference comes from the great Greek physician Galen, writing in the 2nd century AD, over 200 years after Cleopatra's death. He mentions a work called Cosmetics, or On Cosmetics, attributed to her. But this wasn't some frivolous beauty blog of the ancient world. In the classical tradition, cosmetics was a branch of medicine. It was dermatology, pharmacology, and preventative health. Her book, Galen suggests, was a comprehensive guide. It would have covered everything from the preparation of soaps and deodorants to sophisticated treatments for hair loss, skin lesions, and scars. It dealt with perfumery not as luxury, but as a complex chemical art. She is also credited, through later Arabic medical traditions that may have preserved fragments of her work, with authoring texts on gynecology, obstetrics, and the properties of medicinal herbs. Think about that. Between ruling a fractious kingdom and navigating the lethal politics of Rome, she found the time and possessed the dedicated intellect to research, experiment, and write authoritative texts on medicine. This wasn't a hobby. This was the work of a practicing scholar queen, positioning herself not just as a ruler, but as a contributor to the great Alexandrian tradition of learning. She wasn't just funding the library, she was aspiring to fill its shelves with her own work. This leads us directly into the heart of her private chambers, transformed into a kind of elegant apothecary's workshop. Cleopatra, the chemist-pharmacist, is a figure who makes perfect sense when you consider her lineage. The Ptolemies were obsessed with rare and wondrous substances, exotic animals for their menageries, strange spices for their tables, and precious materials for their arts. Cleopatra applied this acquisitive curiosity to the realm of practical science. Take her iconic look, the one immortalized in 1,000 statues, the dramatic, kohl-rimmed eyes. This was not mere fashion. The primary ingredient was galena, a lead sulfide, or more rarely, powdered antimony. Mixed with fats into a paste, it served multiple brilliant, practical functions. In the blinding Egyptian sun, it reduced glare, much like the black grease smeared under the eyes of modern athletes. More importantly, it had mild antibacterial and insect-repellent properties, fighting off the eye infections and flies that were rampant in the Nile Delta. Her famous green eyeshadow, made from crushed malachite, contained copper salts, which also had disinfectant qualities. Every stroke of her makeup brush was, in part, a calculated act of public health and comfort. Then there were the perfumes. Ancient Alexandria was the global epicenter of the perfume trade, and Cleopatra was its most famous and likely most demanding client. Her signature scent was said to be a complex, devastatingly potent mixture. Ancient sources hint at recipes involving myrrh, cinnamon, cardamom, and olive oil, but the most intriguing component is something called nard or spikenard. This was an incredibly expensive, thick, musky sweet oil extracted from a flowering plant high in the Himalayas. It was the ultimate luxury import, worth more than its weight in silver. But nard had another property beyond its scent. It was a known mild sedative and psychoactive. In large enough quantities, its heavy, persistent fragrance could induce a sense of calm, euphoria, or lightheadedness. Now let's connect the dots. Imagine you are a Roman general, a man used to the smells of leather, sweat, iron, and campfire smoke. You are confronted by this queen who speaks your language flawlessly, argues politics with razor-sharp logic, and then from within her aura emanates this strange, intoxicating, and utterly foreign perfume. It's a scent of unimaginable wealth, of the mysterious East, and it works on the senses on a physiological level. It wasn't witchcraft, it was advanced aromatic chemistry. She was quite literally creating an atmosphere, a psychological and physiological space around her that was uniquely hers. Her boudoir was, in this sense, another throne room, where she controlled every element of perception, down to the very air her visitors breathed. But this scientific mind had a darker, more ruthless chamber. And this brings us to the most chilling and debated of the facts surrounding her: her alleged experiments with poisons. The story comes from several Roman historians who may have had reason to paint her as monstrous, but the detail is so specific it carries a grim weight. According to the tale, in the latter years of her life, fearing capture by Octavian more than anything else, Cleopatra became obsessed with finding the perfect means of suicide. She wanted a death that was swift, relatively painless, and left her body presentable, a final act of royal dignity. To this end, she is said to have begun a gruesome clinical research project. She collected all manner of toxic substances, venoms from snakes like the Egyptian asp, the horned viper, and the cobra, plant-based poisons like hemlock, wolf's bane, and the seeds of the strychnine tree, and mineral poisons like arsenic. Then she allegedly tested them. The subjects were, the historians coldly note, convicted criminals and slaves condemned to die. The methodology was systematic. She would administer a poison and carefully record its effects: the speed of onset, the symptoms, convulsions, paralysis, vomiting, pain, the time until death, and the state of the corpse. The goal was to rank them, to find the optimal exit. The Roman writer Cassius Dio even claims she tested methods of application: fangs versus a lancet dipped in venom, ingestion versus a wound. This story, whether fully true or embellished, is terrifying not for its cruelty alone. Such cruelty was, tragically, not uncommon in the ancient world, but for what it reveals about her character. It shows a mind capable of profound detachment, of viewing even the subject of her own death as a problem to be solved through empirical data. It is the ultimate extension of her scientific approach: hypothesis, which poison is best; experimentation, administer and observe; and conclusion, select the most efficient tool. There is a brutal, almost inhuman logic to it. It strips away any last romanticism and reveals the steel core of a ruler who sought to control her narrative to the very last breath, using the tools of science to dictate the final terms of her own story. Finally, let's step out of these intimate, potent rooms and into the grandest hall of knowledge the world had ever known: the Great Library of Alexandria. Cleopatra was, by birth and inclination, its guardian, and she dreamed for it a truly epic dream. She envisioned expanding the library to contain all the books in the world. The Ptolemies had a long-standing, aggressive policy of acquiring texts. Ships docking in Alexandria were searched for scrolls. Any found were confiscated, copied by the library's army of scribes, and the copies were sometimes returned to the owners, while the originals were filed away in the vast collections. It was state-sponsored intellectual piracy on a grand scale. Cleopatra, it seems, wanted to systematize and perfect this to its ultimate conclusion. There are mentions, though vague, of a grand ambition to obtain, copy, and catalog every single work from every known nation. Not just Greek and Egyptian, but Persian, Indian, Hebrew, Mesopotamian, and beyond. She understood that knowledge was the true source of soft power, that the repository of the world's wisdom would make Alexandria, and by extension herself, the indispensable center of the civilized universe. This dream was cut short by war, politics, and her eventual fall. But the ambition itself is breathtaking. It frames her not just as a patron, but as an archivist of humanity. In a very modern sense, she wanted to build the ultimate database, the complete server of ancient wisdom. She saw the library not as a static monument, but as a living, growing organism that needed to consume all written thought to become whole. So who do we see when we put these pieces together? We see a woman whose daily life blended governance with grinding herbs in a mortar. A woman who could debate military strategy with Antony in the morning and in the afternoon, carefully note the viscosity of a new perfume base or the reaction time of a new toxin. Her power was multidimensional. It was the power of speech, the power of spectacle, the power of political calculation, and beneath it all, the quiet, relentless power of applied knowledge. She used chemistry to craft her aura and to plan her exit. She used medicine to heal and to maintain her public visage. She used her scholarship to claim authority in the realm of ideas. This was the formidable foundation upon which the more public dramas were built. The queen who met Caesar and Antony was not just charming, she was formidably knowledgeable. She could talk cosmetics with their wives, poisons with their generals, and philosophy with their scholars, all from a position of undeniable expertise. She made herself intellectually inescapable. In this hidden, scent-filled wing of her palace, Cleopatra wasn't just playing the Game of Thrones. She was quietly, methodically brewing the very substances, from enchanting perfumes to fatal poisons, that would define its most dramatic moments. Here, the legend of the temptress dies, and the far more compelling reality of the scientist queen takes solid and startling form. Picture this. Rome, 46 BC. The city isn't the marble-clad empire of later imperial glory yet. It's a sprawling, noisy, chaotic maze of brick and ambition, steeped in the deep, musty smell of tradition. The air is thick with the smoke of sacrifices, the dust of construction, and the tension of a republic that has just torn itself apart and been stitched back together by one man. That man, Julius Caesar, is at the absolute peak of his power. He is celebrating not one, but 4 magnificent triumphs for his victories in Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa. The city is drunk on spectacle, on plunder, on relief, and on a nervous, simmering uncertainty about what this new, unchallenged authority means. And into this ferment, into the very heart of the wolf's den, comes Cleopatra. She isn't invading, she isn't conquering, she has been invited, or perhaps more accurately, summoned. After the birth of their son, Caesarion, and their leisurely, godlike progress up the Nile, Caesar returned to Rome to secure his position. Now he has sent for her. This is not a secret tryst, it is a state visit. She arrives as a socius et amicus populi Romani, an ally and friend of the Roman people. But everyone knows she is so much more. She is the mother of his only suspected son. She is the living, breathing testament to his power extending over ancient, exotic kingdoms. And she is about to become Rome's most talked about, controversial, and utterly mesmerizing houseguest. This chapter isn't about battles or treaties. It's about perception. It's about a masterclass in personal branding conducted on the most hostile, conservative stage imaginable. Cleopatra's years in Rome were her most daring and dangerous public relations campaign. First, let's find her address. She didn't stay in some diplomatic hostel. Caesar installed her, along with her entourage, which included her younger brother husband, Ptolemy XIII, a hollow teenage puppet she'd brought along for political cover, and the infant Caesarion, in his own horti, his luxurious villas and gardens across the Tiber River. This was a suburb of sorts, less crowded than the Forum, filled with the sprawling estates of the ultra-wealthy. It was private, but not secret. It was a statement. She wasn't a visiting dignitary to be lodged in official quarters. She was part of his household, under his personal protection and patronage. For the Roman elite, this was scandalous intimacy made stone and mortar. Every day her presence there continued was a quiet provocation. Now imagine the scene inside those villas. It is a little patch of Alexandria transplanted to the Italian countryside. The language is Greek. The scents are of spikenard and cinnamon, not laurel and incense. The servants are Egyptian and Greek. At its center is a queen holding court. And this is where our first shocking fact comes to life. Cleopatra lived openly in Rome as a mother and a consort for over a year. She wasn't hiding Caesarion. She was raising him, visibly, as a prince. Roman visitors to the villa would have seen the child, would have heard him called by a name that echoed their own dictators. This was a walking, gurgling political bombshell. In Roman law, Caesar could not officially acknowledge a son born to a foreign woman without citizenship, and he never did so legally. But by allowing them to live in his home, by allowing the child to bear his name informally, he was winking at the world. And Cleopatra? She was ensuring the world saw. For her, Caesarion was not just a son, he was the ultimate fusion of her dynasty and Rome's, a human bridge, her greatest political asset. To have him there in Rome was to make the idea of his lineage tangible, undeniable, and deeply threatening to every other Roman with ambitions or a claim to Caesar's legacy. But Caesar made an even more brazen and arguably reckless statement of her place in his world. This is the scandal that truly set the Senate's teeth on edge. He placed a golden statue of Cleopatra in the temple of Venus Genetrix. To understand why this was nuclear, you need to understand the temple. Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother, or the Ancestress, was not just any temple. Caesar had vowed to build it on the eve of the Battle of Pharsalus, claiming direct descent from the goddess through the Trojan prince Aeneas. This temple in his new Forum Julium was the sacred monumental bedrock of his personal mythos, his divine PR campaign. It was the most important building in Rome to him, a symbol of his family's semi-divine origins, and by extension, his right to rule. And in this holiest of holies, next to the cult statue of the goddess herself, he installed a glittering, solid gold effigy of a living, breathing foreign queen. Let that sink in. In the Roman mind, temples were for gods and deified abstractions, not for contemporary politicians, and certainly never for foreign monarchs. It blurred every line imaginable, between mortal and divine, between Roman and foreign, between state, religion, and personal obsession. It suggested Cleopatra was not just his lover, but part of his divine narrative, enshrined alongside his ancestress. To his opponents, it was the clearest possible sign that Caesar's allegiance was shifting from Rome to Alexandria, from republic to monarchy, from Roman tradition to Eastern despotism. The statue wasn't just a gift, it was a manifesto cast in precious metal, and it screamed her importance to the heavens. Meanwhile, Cleopatra wasn't a prisoner in her villa. She became a public spectacle, the star of Rome's gossip circuit. She didn't adopt Roman dress. She would have appeared in her Greek-style chiton and himation, perhaps with Egyptian-inspired jewelry, a vision of sophisticated Eastern royalty. She held salons. Intellectuals, poets, and politicians curious or ambitious enough to cross the Tiber came to see her. The great orator Cicero was one such visitor. His letters reveal a fascinating petty bitterness. He found her arrogant, Regina, arrogantum, but he also grudgingly had to deal with her. He asked her for favors, literary or scholarly help, likely accessing Alexandrian libraries through her, and she granted them. But he never liked her. His disdain is a perfect snapshot of the conservative Roman reaction, a mixture of intellectual fascination, cultural revulsion, and political fear. The Roman mob and the elites alike were transfixed. They told wild stories about her. They whispered that she was a witch who had enchanted Caesar with potions. They called her the Egyptian woman or the queen with a sneer, a shorthand for everything un-Roman: luxury, sexual license, cunning, and regal ambition. She was the subject of crude graffiti and anxious Senate debates. Every dinner party buzzed with talk of her. Was Caesar planning to marry her? Would he move the capital to Alexandria? Would he declare their son his heir and make him king of Rome? Her mere presence made the unthinkable seem possible. She was a human Rorschach test upon which Romans projected their deepest fears about where Caesar's power was leading. Cleopatra, for her part, played this role with impeccable precision. She wasn't trying to be liked by the Roman masses. She was solidifying her mythic status and her bond with Caesar. She was there to learn, to observe, to network, and to be seen as an equal power beside the master of Rome. She likely attended some of his triumphs, a silent, potent symbol of the Egyptian victory being celebrated. She watched the brutal Roman political machine up close, studying its gears and its weaknesses. She saw the fawning senators, the scheming lieutenants like Mark Antony, and the young, coldly calculating Octavian, Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son. She was taking the measure of her future, and then the floor fell out from under everything. The Ides of March, 44 BC. Cleopatra was almost certainly still in Rome, likely at the Tiber Villa. News of the assassination in the theater of Pompey would have reached her with terrifying speed, carried by breathless, panicked servants. Caesar was dead, butchered by men he considered colleagues and friends. In an instant, her entire position collapsed. Her protector was gone. Her host was gone. The man who had enshrined her in gold was now a bloody corpse on the Senate floor. The city that had viewed her with suspicion now viewed her with outright hostility. She was the stranded ally of the murdered tyrant, a foreign queen with deep ties to the most hated figure in the eyes of the liberators, Caesar's assassins. Her life, and more importantly, the life of her son, were in immediate extreme danger. What followed was her quietest, most brilliant, and most courageous act in Rome, her swift and secret escape. There was no time for ceremony, for packing treasures. The priority was survival and the security of the dynasty, herself and Caesarion. The sources are thin on the details, which is a testament to how well it was executed. She likely used a small, trusted group from her Egyptian entourage. They would have left at night or in some disguised hurry. Perhaps they disguised themselves as merchants or as part of a smaller, less conspicuous household. They avoided the main roads where Brutus and Cassius might have patrols looking for Caesar's allies. They moved quickly to the coast, to Ostia or another port. Within weeks, maybe even days of Caesar's murder, Cleopatra, Ptolemy of Martoin, and the 3-year-old Caesarion were on a ship, leaving Italy behind. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait to see how the political winds would blow. She assessed the threat with cold clarity and executed a flawless evacuation. It was the same pragmatic instinct that had once led her to wrap herself in a carpet. But this time, the goal was vanishing, not appearing. By the time the victorious but squabbling factions in Rome, the liberators, Mark Antony and Octavian, even thought to consider the Egyptian queen in their calculations, she was already gone, a ghost on the sea, headed back to her own power base. She left behind the golden statue, which would soon be removed, the whispered legends, and a city she had profoundly shaken. Her Roman holiday was over. It had lasted roughly 2.5 years. In that time, she had transformed from Caesar's exotic paramour into an international political figure who had lived at the heart of the Republic, challenged its deepest sensibilities, and survived its most violent convulsion. She had seen the face of the beast, learned its rhythms, and identified its key players. She returned to Alexandria not as a provincial queen, but as a world stage operator who knew the enemy intimately. The experience had been terrifying, intoxicating, and invaluable. The next phase of the game would not be played on Roman soil, but the lessons learned there would inform every move she made. The quiet, calculating mind that had perfected perfumes and poisons was now focused on a new formula: how to secure her throne, her son's future, and her kingdom's independence in a world where Rome, wounded and furious, was now the only question that mattered. If Rome was a lesson in navigating hostile conservative politics, then the years with Mark Antony were Cleopatra's masterpiece in unchecked sovereign theater. This chapter isn't about the slow burn of political alliance, though that was its engine. It's about the glorious, wasteful, jaw-dropping flame that burned at its center. After the grim reality of Caesar's murder and the precarious years that followed, Cleopatra's relationship with Marcus Antonius was a defiant, decade-long performance of power, passion, and propaganda. It was the apotheosis of her understanding that perception is reality, and that a legend, if crafted skillfully enough, could become a weapon as potent as any legion. Our story picks up after the messy, brutal civil wars that followed Caesar's death. Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus had formed the Second Triumvirate, carving up the Roman world. Antony got the East, the rich, chaotic, fascinating provinces that bordered Cleopatra's Egypt. In 41 BC, he summoned her to meet him at Tarsus in Cilicia. His motives were practical. He needed money and supplies for his planned war against the Parthian Empire. She was the wealthiest monarch in his sphere. He expected a vassal, a supplicant with an open treasury. What he got was a production. Cleopatra did not hurry. She let Antony wait, letting his need and his curiosity simmer. When she finally came, she did not arrive on a state galley. She came on a barge that deserves its own adjective: Cleopatra's. Plutarch's description is the stuff of pure, decadent fantasy, but it's a fantasy she deliberately authored. The stern was gold, the sails purple, the oars silver, rising and falling to the music of flutes, pipes, and lyres. She herself reclined beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, dressed as Venus, attended by beautiful boys costumed as cupids who fanned her. Her most beautiful slave girls, costumed as Nereids and Graces, were stationed at the rudders and ropes. Exotic perfumes from incense burners wafted from the vessel to the shores, where crowds gathered, wondering if the goddess Aphrodite had come to revel with Dionysus for the good of Asia. This was her opening statement. She was not a subject to be summoned. She was a divinity arriving for a conclave. She was not coming to his turf on his terms. She was transforming the very space into her stage. Antony, the reveler, the man who fancied himself a new Dionysus, was instantly, utterly captivated. The practical meeting about grain and money became a legendary party on her ship, and he was left, in the words of the historian, ensnared by her. But of all the spectacles they created, one story towers above the rest, a perfect diamond of absurdity and genius: the legend of the dissolved pearl. The tale, told by the natural philosopher Pliny the Elder a century later, goes like this. During the incredible competitive banquets Cleopatra and Antony hosted for one another, a wager was made. Antony, marveling at the staggering luxury, wondered aloud if any meal could ever be more expensive. Cleopatra, with a smile, bet him she could spend 10 million sesterces on a single dinner. Intrigued, he took the bet. The next day, the banquet was, while magnificent, not unusually so. Antony laughed, thinking he had won. Then Cleopatra called for the second course. A servant placed before her a single vessel of strong vinegar. She then took from her ear one of the two largest, most perfect pearls ever known in the ancient world, each supposedly worth 10 million sesterces. She dropped it into the vinegar. The acidic liquid, according to the tale, fizzed and dissolved the priceless gem. She then stirred the solution and drank it down, toasting Antony's health. She reached for the second pearl to repeat the feat for the next course, but the stunned judge of the wager, sometimes said to be a philosopher named Lucius Plancus, declared her the winner before she could destroy the second one. Now let's put on our lab coats for a moment. Vinegar, acetic acid, can dissolve calcium carbonate, which is what a pearl is. But it would take hours, if not days, not the theatrical moment the story requires. It's chemically possible, but practically it would be a slow, anticlimactic fizzle. Most historians agree the literal event almost certainly never happened. But that's entirely beside the point. The genius of the story isn't in its chemistry, it's in its psychology and its PR value. Whether she staged a trick, crushing a pearl and mixing it with vinegar, or using a fake, or whether the entire tale was a brilliant piece of propaganda invented later, it served a monumental purpose. It communicated one idea with crystal clarity. The wealth of Egypt is beyond your comprehension. It rendered Roman ideas of value and luxury childish. What was 10 million sesterces to a Roman general? A fortune. What was it to the Queen of Egypt? A drink. The story painted her as existing on a plane of such absolute, untouchable abundance that she could literally consume a nation's ransom on a whim. It was the ultimate flex, a piece of shock content that would be whispered about from Syria to Spain, cementing her myth as the incarnate spirit of limitless wealth. It made Antony, for all his power, look like a provincial spectator at her show. This ethos of spectacular performance defined their private world. They founded a dining society called the Inimitable Livers, or the Order of the Incomparable Life. This wasn't just a fancy supper club. It was a sustained, years-long piece of immersive theater where they and their inner circle performed roles nightly. One evening, Antony would be Dionysus and Cleopatra would be Aphrodite. Another, they would swap costumes with their servants, with Antony playing a slave and Cleopatra a maid. And they would go through the halls of the palace, bursting in on their own startled, embarrassed guests, playing practical jokes. They staged elaborate fishing trips where Antony, frustrated by his catch, had divers attach pre-caught fish to his hook, only for Cleopatra to arrange for a diver to attach a salted, blackened fish from the Black Sea the next day, to the uproarious laughter of her guests when he pulled it up. This was more than decadence. It was a deliberate shared rejection of the stiff, grave, and hypocritical dignitas of Rome, which they both despised. In their palace, they were not a Roman triumvir and a client queen. They were gods, they were actors. They were revelers freed from the constraints of a world that sought to define and limit them. It was a bubble of their own creation, but a bubble with state policy flowing from its center. Cleopatra's mind, however, never fully left the library, even amidst the revelry. Another famous anecdote highlights this. Antony, an enthusiastic but hardly profound intellect, was a lover of books in his own way. During his time in Alexandria, immersed in the greatest collection of knowledge on earth, he developed a desire. He asked Cleopatra if she would gift him some of the scrolls from the great library for his own use. For any other monarch, this might be a simple favor. For Cleopatra, guardian of the muses, this was a potential sacrilege. The library's collections were sacred, immutable. Her response, as told, is another masterpiece of grandiose thinking. She refused to remove a single scroll from the library. Instead, she allegedly gifted him 200,000 scrolls from the rival library of Pergamum. The historical accuracy is debated. Pergamum's library was already significant, and such a transfer would have been a massive logistical feat. But the symbolic truth of the story is what matters. It says, "I will not diminish my treasure to feed your whim, but my power is such that I can give you the treasure of an entire rival kingdom instead." It was a move of breathtaking scale, turning a personal request into an act of imperial cultural redistribution. It reinforced her identity as the ultimate steward of knowledge, whose resources were so vast she could solve problems at the level of entire libraries. All of this theatricality, this cult of the inimitable life, was the glittering surface of a deep and deadly, serious political project. The culmination in the act that would finally seal their fate with Rome was the donations of Alexandria. In 34 BC, after a successful, though not decisively victorious, campaign against Armenia, Antony and Cleopatra staged their most public and provocative spectacle. They held a triumphal procession, not in the Roman Forum, but in the Gymnasium of Alexandria. Antony, in the guise of Dionysus Osiris, and Cleopatra as Isis Aphrodite, sat on golden thrones on a silver platform. Before them were arrayed their children, and here, before the assembled people of Alexandria and the ambassadors of the East, they proceeded to redistribute the kingdoms of the Roman East as if they were their personal property. They declared Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar, to be not only co-ruler of Egypt with her, but king of kings. More shockingly, they declared him the true, legitimate son of Caesar, a direct challenge to Octavian, the adopted heir. To their own three children together, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, they granted vast territories. Alexander Helios was given Armenia, Media, and Parthia, the latter unconquered. Cleopatra Selene received Cyrenaica in Libya. The toddler Ptolemy Philadelphus was given Syria and Cilicia. Cleopatra herself was proclaimed Queen of Kings and of her sons who are kings. This was not just a party game. This was a geopolitical declaration of war on the Roman order. It repudiated the triumvirate's arrangements. It presented a new rival Hellenistic monarchy with Cleopatra's Ptolemaic Egyptian dynasty at its core, supplanting Roman authority in the East. By elevating Caesarion as Caesar's true heir, it struck at the very heart of Octavian's political legitimacy. The donations presented Antony not as a Roman magistrate, but as an Eastern monarch, a god-king, the consort of the pharaoh, giving away Roman provinces to his half-Egyptian children. In Rome, when the reports arrived, the effect was cataclysmic. Octavian's propaganda machine, which had been churning out stories of Antony's decadence and enslavement to the Egyptian queen, now had its concrete, undeniable proof. Antony had given away Rome's conquests. He had recognized a bastard as Caesar's heir. He was planning to move the capital to Alexandria. The donations provided the perfect, legitimate casus belli. Antony was declared a public enemy, and war was framed not as a civil conflict between Romans, but as a righteous war of Roman civilization against the Oriental despotism and seductive menace of Cleopatra. And this is the ultimate irony of their extravagant, inimitable life. Every party, every piece of gossip about the pearl or the costumes, every story of waste and worship had been carefully harvested by Octavian to paint a picture of a man morally corrupted and a foreign threat. The donations transformed that personal slander into a concrete political treason. The theater they had created to project their power became the very evidence used to destroy them. Cleopatra's years with Antony were the zenith of her artistic approach to sovereignty. She proved that a crown could be worn not just as a symbol of authority, but as a prop in an endless, magnificent play where she was simultaneously playwright, lead actress, and divine patron. She turned her relationship, her wealth, and her very city into a stage for a vision of absolute godlike monarchy. But in the end, the most critical audience, the Roman people, manipulated by a colder, more ruthless director in Octavian, rejected the production. The final act was being written not in the perfumed halls of Alexandria, but in the stark, strategic mind of her enemy and on the choppy waves of the Ionian Sea. The curtain was about to fall, and the price of such unparalleled theater would be everything. The end begins not in Alexandria, but on the choppy gray waters of the Ionian Sea, at a promontory in western Greece called Actium. It is September 2nd on 31st BC. The combined fleets of Mark Antony and Cleopatra face those of Octavian, commanded by the shrewd admiral Agrippa. The battle is a confused, grinding affair, but its pivotal moment is the stuff of eternal scandal and speculation. In the midst of the fighting, Cleopatra's squadron of 60 Egyptian ships, positioned behind Antony's heavier vessels, suddenly hoists full sail and breaks through the center of the battle, fleeing for the open sea. Antony, seeing her flagship depart, abandons his own command, transfers to a faster quinquereme, and speeds after her. He leaves his entire fleet and his army to be crushed in his wake. The image is indelible, the general deserting his men for a woman. Octavian's propaganda would forever etch this as the moment Antony's Roman virtues was utterly extinguished by Eastern effeminacy and sorcery. But the truth, as with all things involving Cleopatra, was likely more strategic. Their plan, concocted in desperation as they were trapped by blockade and disease, may have always been a fighting retreat, to punch through with their treasure fleet and live to fight another day from the resources of Egypt. It failed. They escaped with their lives and some of their wealth, but their military power and their reputation were shattered on the rocks of Actium. A year later, Octavian's legions are at the gates of Alexandria. Antony's remaining forces desert or defect. There is no grand last stand. On August 1st, 30 BC, Antony, misinformed by a deliberately cruel ruse that Cleopatra has already taken her own life, falls on his sword. He dies not instantly but mortally wounded, and is carried to the monument where Cleopatra has barricaded herself with her treasures. He dies in her arms, and now Cleopatra is alone, truly alone. The last of the Ptolemies in power, the last pharaoh surrounded by the cold, efficient machinery of Roman conquest personified by Octavian. He wants her alive, not out of mercy, but for his triumph. To parade her, the magnificent, legendary Queen of Egypt, in golden chains through the streets of Rome, would be the ultimate capstone to his victory, the living proof of his supremacy over the decadent East. For Cleopatra, this fate is a metaphysical horror worse than death. It is the utter annihilation of her divine persona, the reduction of Isis to a caged curiosity. She will not provide the finale to his show. So she orchestrates her own. This brings us to the central, eternal mystery. How did she die? The romantic, poetic version, immortalized by Shakespeare in 1,000 paintings, is the asp. The story goes that she arranged for a peasant to deliver a basket of figs. Hidden among the sweet fruit was a venomous Egyptian asp, or perhaps two. After dressing in her full royal regalia, she allowed the serpents to strike her arm or breast. Her two faithful handmaidens, Eris and Charmian, died with her. When Octavian's guards burst in, they found the queen dead upon her golden couch, serene and majestic, with one of the maidens dead at her feet, and the other, Charmian, clumsily adjusting the diadem on her mistress's brow before she too fell. "A fine deed this, Charmian," a Roman supposedly said, to which the dying woman replied, "It is indeed most fine, and befitting the descendant of so many kings. It is a perfect ending, theatrical, symbolic, and clean. The asp was associated with the uraeus, the sacred cobra on the pharaoh's crown, a symbol of divine royalty and protection. Its venom brought a drowsy, painless death, a fitting end for a daughter of the sun. It preserved her beauty and her dignity intact. It was, in short, an exit worthy of the inimitable livers. But is it true? The problems are numerous. An asp's bite is not reliably painless. It can cause vomiting, swelling, and agonizing disfigurement. Could a snake be reliably smuggled in a basket and controlled to bite on command? Could one snake kill 3 adults? Octavian himself seems to have promoted the asp story. It was picturesque and avoided the alternative, that he had failed in his prime objective of taking her alive. The Roman historians, writing under the reign of Augustus, the former Octavian, had every reason to perpetuate the poetic myth. A more likely, if less glorious, scenario involves poison. This was, after all, her field of expertise. She was a noted toxicologist. She had spent years, according to legend, researching the most painless, efficient toxins. A hidden poison, perhaps in a hairpin or a ring, or a salve applied to a self-inflicted wound, would have been perfectly in character. It would have been quick, controlled, and guaranteed. Some sources even suggest she tested a variety of poisons on condemned prisoners in her final days to select the best. The asp could have been a metaphor for the serpent of poison, or a deliberate piece of stagecraft to obscure the simpler, more clinical truth. The image of the serene queen and her dead attendants, however, suggests something that worked with swift, somnolent efficiency, which aligns with certain plant-based neurotoxins as much as, if not more than, serpent venom. Another poignant legend surrounds her final act, the last letter to Octavian. As the story goes, having resolved to die, she wrote a short, formal missive to the conquering Roman. She sealed it and sent it by messenger. The letter contained a single simple request, that she be buried beside Antony. She then proceeded to her end. By the time Octavian received the letter and, alarmed, sent guards running to stop her, she was already dead or dying. It was her final act of control. She dictated the terms of the aftermath, forcing upon him a grudging respect. She made her last move not on the battlefield, but in the realm of ceremony and memory, and he had no choice but to comply. He allowed them to be buried together, though the location of their tomb remains one of Alexandria's greatest secrets, lost to time. This story, true or not, encapsulates her genius. Even in total defeat, she managed to secure a symbolic victory, wresting narrative control from the victor. With her death, the House of Ptolemy and the 3th-century Hellenistic experiment in Egypt was extinguished. Egypt became a Roman province, the personal breadbasket of the emperor. But what of her bloodline? The fate of her children is a quiet, tragic coda to the epic. Her first and most significant child, Ptolemy 15 the Philopator Philometor Caesar, Caesarion, Little Caesar, was 17. He represented the greatest threat to Octavian's claim as Julius Caesar's sole heir. Cleopatra had sent him fleeing south to the Red Sea ports, hoping he could escape to India or Arabia. He was betrayed by his tutor. Upon capturing him, Octavian consulted his philosophers. The story recounts that the philosopher Arius Didymus, paraphrasing Homer, advised, "Too many Caesars is not a good thing." It was a death sentence. Caesarion was executed. The last potential bridge between Rome and the Ptolemaic line was severed. With him died the living, breathing symbol of her union with the greatest Roman. Her 3 children with Antony met a different, bittersweet fate. Alexander Helios, the sun, and Cleopatra Selene, the moon, the twins, and their younger brother Ptolemy Philadelphus, were taken to Rome. They were paraded in Octavian's triple triumph for his victories in Illyricum, at Actium, and in Egypt. The crowd, we are told, wept to see them, so young and beautiful, walking in chains behind an effigy of their dead mother, with an asp clutched to her arm. It was a masterpiece of cruel theater. But then, in a calculated display of clementia, mercy, Octavian handed them over to his virtuous sister Octavia, Mark Antony's former scorned Roman wife. to be raised in her household. The irony is profound and cutting. The children of the wicked Eastern queen were nurtured by the epitome of Roman matronly virtue, the woman whose honor their mother had supposedly defiled. Cleopatra Selene was later married, with Octavian's blessing, to the scholarly King Juba II of Numidia, and became a respected queen in her own right. The boys, however, fade from history, likely dying young of illness or obscure fates. Their survival through Octavia was the ultimate Roman domestication of Cleopatra's legacy, a neat and moralizing end to the story. And so, with her kingdom annexed, her lover dead, her eldest son murdered, and her younger children assimilated into the very Roman world she had defied, it would seem Cleopatra had lost everything. Octavian had won in every conceivable, material way. He returned to Rome, changed his name to Augustus, and founded an empire that would last for centuries. He tried to erase her. He ordered her statues pulled down. He downplayed her role in his official histories, painting her as a mere distraction, a monstrous seductress. He declared the Egyptian gods subdued. But here we arrive at the final, and perhaps most shocking fact of all. Cleopatra won the War of Images. Octavian conquered a kingdom. But he could not conquer a myth. In fact, his own propaganda, designed to vilify her, only fed the legend. By painting her as a threat so immense, a seductress so potent, a witch so powerful that she could unman the great Mark Antony and threaten Rome itself, he inadvertently cemented her status as a woman of unparalleled power. He made her eternal. He tried to bury the scholar, the polyglot, the shrewd ruler, and the diplomatic genius under the caricature of the decadent Oriental queen. But the caricature was too vivid, too compelling to be forgotten. The story was too good. The carpet, the pearl, the asp, the lavish love affair that shook empires. While Augustus became a marble statue, distant, godlike, and impersonal, Cleopatra remained human, thrillingly and tragically so. She became a story people told, a symbol of lost grandeur, of passionate love, of defiant pride, of a world of mystery and color that the stern, efficient Romans had stamped out. Her legacy did not flow through her children's bloodlines, which were extinguished or absorbed. It flowed through narrative. She became a blank canvas upon which every subsequent age could project its own fascinations and fears. To the Middle Ages, she was a moral lesson in lust and pride. To the Renaissance, she was a tragic heroine of passion and power. To the Romantics, she was the ultimate icon of doomed love. To the modern age, she is a puzzle of politics, gender, and identity. The woman who meticulously studied poisons, who authored medical texts, who spoke 9 languages, and who played the dangerous game of superpower politics for 2 decades, was ultimately reduced and elevated to a series of iconic moments. But those moments have proven more durable than any border, any statute, any empire. Octavian's Rome fell. Cleopatra's story is still told. In the quiet of her monument, choosing her own end, she performed the final and most enduring act of her reign. She transformed historical defeat into legendary immortality. She understood that how you exit the stage is often more important than how long you stayed upon it. By taking control of her death, she denied her enemy his ultimate prize and authored the perfect, unforgettable final scene for her own biography. The light of her last sunset was so brilliant, so deliberately staged, that its afterglow has colored the imagination of the world for 2,000 years. She ceased to be a mere historical figure and became an archetype. The queen, the lover, the other, the powerful woman who dared to negotiate with empires as an equal, and who in the end bowed to no one but her own conception of destiny. The asp, whether real or metaphorical, did not just kill a queen, it released a myth into the world, one that we are still, in our way, trying to understand as we drift into sleep, lulled by the ancient, distant echo of a voice that could bend languages and a will that could shape history itself. And so, my friend, here we are. The candles have burned low, the night has deepened around us, and the echoes of ancient Alexandria are fading back into the realm of dreams and whispered history. We followed her from the quiet scholar in the library to the master strategist in the carpet, From the scientist queen amongst her poisons and perfumes to the dazzling performer who dined with gods and dissolved pearls. We stood with her in the heart of Rome, felt the tension of her escape, and finally witnessed her ultimate, controlled exit in that quiet monument. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? I'll be honest with you. Telling this story, especially in this quiet, nighttime way, feels different. It's not about listing dry facts. It's about trying to hear a voice across 2,000 years, to see past the marble and the gold and the propaganda to the person, fiercely intelligent, endlessly adaptable, flawed, proud, and unimaginably brave. She wasn't a saint or a monster. She was a human being operating at the absolute zenith of her potential in a world that gave women in power precious few roadmaps. She wrote her own, with languages, with chemistry, with political cunning, and yes, with breathtaking theater. And that's the magic of these stories we explore together. They're not just about what happened, they're about the who, the minds, the choices, the moments of sheer, audacious nerve that change everything. Now, as this particular story settles into that comfortable, post-tale silence, I have a small, personal request. This channel, this little corner of quiet tales and forgotten wonders, is our shared space. YouTube, in its infinite algorithmic wisdom, doesn't shower small, story-focused channels like this with gold or promotion. We exist here only because people like you, who truly love diving into the past's hidden corners, choose to be here. You're not a passive viewer. You're the reason this quiet campfire of stories keeps burning. So if these nightly journeys mean something to you, if you've enjoyed unraveling the real Cleopatra or any of our other explorations, the single greatest thing you can do to ensure we keep meeting like this is to hit that subscribe button. It's more than just a click. It's a nod across the digital darkness that says, I'm here, keep going. I want to hear the next story. It's what tells the algorithms that this is a place worth noticing, and it's what gives me the certainty that I'm not just whispering into a void, but sharing these secrets with a friend. And because we're friends here, I'd love to actually hear from you. Drop a comment down below. Not just an emoji, though those are fun too, but maybe tell me, what part of Cleopatra's story stuck with you the most? Was it the polyglot princess in the library? The calculated risk of the carpet? The dark science of the poisons? Or the defiant finality of her choice? Tell me your name, or what you'd like to be called. Share your own bedtime ritual. This community grows one curious, story-loving person at a time, and every voice makes it richer. I have so many more tales waiting in the wings. Stories of other astonishing figures, lost civilizations, strange inventions, and quiet moments that changed the world. They're all lined up, patiently waiting for their turn to be told in this calm, companionable space. So consider this less of a goodbye and more of a see you soon. Thank you truly for spending this time wandering through history with me. It's an honor to be your nighttime storyteller. Now get some rest. Let the images of Nile barges and Roman villas, of perfumed laboratories and silent, dignified goodbyes swirl gently into your own dreams. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here, waiting, with the next story when you return. Until then, sleep well and dream vividly.